A Sun Devils defense that was really good last year could be primed to be even better this year.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. A shout out to my everydayers who are here every day, and thanks for making us your first listen of the day. Don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications wherever you're getting your shows. Stay in touch by following me on Twitter at RichieBrads36 and the podcast at LO_Sun Devils. If you are not subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers before the season starts. We are currently at 828, so we are fighting uphill, but now has never been a better time to subscribe. And of course, we'll find an awesome way to celebrate when we get to that milestone. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back in. Today we are finishing up our series of going through position by position. Now we're cheating a little bit and taking a look at the defense as a whole. I didn't really know statistics to predict other than sacks and turnovers. I could take a look at where they rank in terms of passing yards per game, rushing yards per game, yards per attempt, any stuff like that. If you're interested in that, leave a like on this video, leave a comment, let me know on Twitter, and I will more than happily do an episode on that for you guys. But for today, we're taking a look at all three levels of the defense. We'll be starting with the defensive line, transitioning to the linebackers, and then rounding out with the secondary. Now, with that being said, we're going to take a look at the most intriguing players on each of the three levels and the most important starters on each of the three levels. And then towards the end of the podcast, we'll kind of talk about like, hey, this is how many sacks I could see. This is how many turnovers I could see. Sound good? Sounds good. Let's talk about the defensive line. This is a group that has two really big shoes to fill. There's the departure of BJ Green, who has led the Sun Devils or tied the Sun Devils in sacks as the leader in the 3 seasons he played here. He is gone. You are now trying to replace a guy who is very likely going to be playing on Sundays. That's not easy to do. The good news is you have two potential cornerstone edge rushers with Clayton Smith and Pince Dorbah, and you've got a guy named Elijah O'Neal, who we'll talk about more here in just a moment. Then on the interior, you are replacing your starting defensive tackle, Dashaun Mallory, another guy who is currently in the NFL, fighting for a spot. I can't remember where he is off the top of my head. He was an undrafted free agent, and he is doing everything he can to stick in the NFL. But he was one of the most important players for the Sun Devils defense last year. And it's not going to be easy to replace somebody of his caliber. The good news, again, similar to the depth that you have at edge, you've got a guy like CJ Fite on the interior that could be really important for you. You did a really good job addressing the position in the offseason with Jacob Rich-Kongaika and Zac Swanson and JP Dieter. There's bodies here to take a look at. Let's start with the intriguing guys. And the first one who comes to mind, as I mentioned, is Elijah O'Neal. Now, O'Neal is going into his senior season, and he looks ready to break out. During spring ball, he caught my attention maybe more than anybody else. He was the one guy that I left spring ball from, and I was like, I'm taking a mental note of number 15. He was ridiculous. He was explosive. He was strong. He was able to bend the edge. Like, he looked like he was ready to be one of those seniors that comes out of nowhere and then just takes the college football world by storm. He's paired with Clayton Smith and Pince Dorbah. And the Sun Devils did a really good job last year of incorporating Smith and Dorbah with BJ Green. And they had those three rotating together, and they ended up combining for 16 and a half sacks. Now you're looking for someone to pair with Clayton Smith and Pince Dorbah, and that might be Elijah O'Neal. You might end up having three guys again that you can rotate, keep everyone fresh, have different matchups and different looks, and have very similar success. I think Elijah O'Neal is in for a breakout season. He is, I would say Clayton Smith is the only other guy on the defensive line that I am more excited about than Elijah O'Neal. I will plant my flag with Elijah O'Neal for sure. Another guy who's really interesting to me, Jacob Rich Kongaika. He's someone that I've been high on this podcast before, transferring from Arizona. So he joined the good guys. Thank goodness. Hopefully he can go undefeated in territorial cups and win one with ASU and have the two that he had at Arizona. But like I said, the defensive interior has a big hole to fill with Dashaun Mallory gone. And the easy solution is Jeff Clark, who is transferring in from Louisville. That's your easy plug-and-play guy. There's still really good competition here. And the loss of Anthony Cooper due to an ACL tear only increased that competition. Outside of CJ Fite, like I said, it's a wide open spot right now for who's going to play next to Fite. Again, Jeff Clark feels like the easy plug and play as a graduate transfer, but Kongaika is someone who I would not be surprised if he was starting by mid-season or the start of the season, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up being a very high-level player for the team. Last guy who's interesting to me, speaking of potential upside, all that good stuff, Zac Swanson. If you're not familiar with the name Zac Swanson, you should be getting familiar with the name Zac Swanson. I am definitely not the first one to talk about him, and I will not be the last to talk about him. Transferring in from Texas, he's a redshirt sophomore, super high upside. This was a former four-star recruit coming out of Brophy Prep, so he is a local kid. He's Activate the Valley. He's 6'4", 282 pounds. The flashes that you see with this kid get you really, really excited to potentially have somebody that can be a cornerstone along the defensive line, considering you could be looking at a lot of change after this year. In a perfect world where you have Clayton Smith blow up, you could be losing Smith, Dorbah, O'Neal, Jeff Clark, maybe Kongaika if he blows up as well. There's a lot of guys that could depart after this year. And Swanson is a redshirt sophomore. Sure, he could depart after this year, but he could also be a fixture of the defensive line for the next 3 years. I feel like he's going to be one of those sleepers going into the year. And he's absolutely going to be on my list when we talk about sleepers for the Sun Devils heading into the year. Now, as far as the most important starters, we've already talked about them, and I think it's fairly obvious. Clayton Smith, for my money's worth, he is one of the highest upside players on either side of the football. He was a former 5-star recruit for a reason. He is incredibly athletic. When he was 100% healthy last year, he was a blur off the edge. He's added 15 pounds of muscle, maybe even 20 pounds of muscle. So he's playing stronger. He's still fast. I believe in my heart of hearts he is in for a 10-sack season, or at least is going to have the highest sack total the Sun Devils have had from a defensive player in the last several years. I think he's going to have a big year. Pince Dorbah, he's going to be the guy opposite him. And Dorbah was brilliant in the first half of the year and kind of disappeared in the second half. He was dealing with injuries and everything else that was going on with that defense. He gets to put together a full season across from Clayton Smith. You're talking about a dynamic bookend duo with the potential of other guys like Justin Wadley or Elijah O'Neal. some of the other guys that are younger, Ramar Williams, to develop behind them. And it's so crucial to have those bookends together. So Clayton Smith, Pince Dorbah for sure. CJ Fite, this is someone that Kenny Dillingham is very high on. At the press conference that they held on Wednesday, CJ Fite was one of the people he talked about quite a bit. Mentioned that he is already earning some leadership status. He's one of the team leaders as a true sophomore. They really like this kid. And there's a very good reason that they like him, because he's pretty good at football. He is going to be one of the most important players in the run game this year. Being able to be as big and strong as he is, he's going to be tasked with anchoring the defensive line. He's going to be the guy up front who is able to take on those double teams, who's going to be able to keep the linebackers' jerseys clean. The other bright side is he's been working on his pass rushing moveset. We heard that from Kenny himself. We heard that from CJ himself, is that they are working on getting him to that next level as a pass rusher. If he's able to take that step forward, and one of the comparisons that I've heard is wanting to be the next Will Sutton, which, as we all know, is quite the mark to set for yourself. If he's able to get to that point, this defense is going to be absolutely dominant. To have a guy from the interior of the defensive line who can completely wreck game plans. He's going to have help too. With Smith and Dorbah on the outside, he's going to get those opportunities to really destroy the middle of the line. There's not going to be any chips. He will face double teams for sure because he's the biggest, strongest dude there, but he could end up really, really taking this defense to the next level. Speaking of the next level, we're going to talk about the linebackers next. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Game Time is the authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball and makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app will actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets, not just for sports, but for concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Flash deals will allow you to save on exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. You can try the zone deals where you pick the section and Game Time chooses the seats for more savings. Their all-in pricing toggle feature is going to show you the total up front, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. You can get a panoramic view of your seat in the app before you buy, so you know what to expect when you arrive. Their lowest price guarantee means that Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. And their Game Time ticket coverage means that you are covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like, hit subscribe, turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. I appreciate you guys for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. And if you have not subscribed to the Locked On Sun Devils YouTube page, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get to 1,000 before the season starts, and we'll find an awesome way to celebrate. Back into our conversation and taking a look at the linebackers now. This is a weird position in a good way because there's a lot of depth, but there's so much depth that I don't know who the starters are. In fact, in my most important starters notes here, I only have one guy listed, and I don't even know if he's for sure going to be a starter. Now, there's a lot of new faces. They brought in Jordan Crook from Arkansas, Keyshawn Elliott from New Mexico State, and Zyrus Fiaseu from San Diego State. Elliott and Fiaseu could be your starters. Wouldn't be a surprise. Jordan Crook, he's got the prestige of playing in the SEC. He doesn't have a ton of playing time. I definitely feel like he's someone that you're going to end up kind of stashing and taking a look at if he can develop down the road, or maybe a part of the 2025 team or something like that. Then you have the two main returning veterans with Tate Romney and Caleb McCullough, who also could be your starting two linebackers for the team. It's a very weird position in a very good way, because I feel like you could come up with any kind of order for these guys to be starters and you'd still be happy with it. But we'll take a look at three guys that I find the most intriguing. The first one, not a surprise, is Keyshawn Elliott. Elliott was hyper productive during his time at New Mexico State. He comes over to Arizona State, and in my opinion, should be plugged in as one of the starters for the Sun Devils. He brings a lot to you in terms of being a good tackler. There's coverage ability, there's pass rushing ability. He's kind of a jack of all trades, and if he's able to really start mastering and honing in on those skills to become better and better and better, and maybe develop a niche as a really good pass coverage guy or pass rusher, finding some way for him to really take that next step forward, he could be one of the most relied upon defenders this upcoming year. There is a lot of change on this defense, but ASU was also similar to the the defensive line, where you're replacing a veteran like Dashaun Mallory. You are trying to replace a veteran linebacker with Tre Brown. Tre Brown is gone. Last year, he was absolutely pivotal to this defense. And that's why I think that Elliott could slide into that role. He is a veteran linebacker. He does have production. He's someone that can do a little bit of everything. He reminds me of Tre Brown. Feels like a nice, easy way to slide him in. The next guy who's really interesting, if you listen to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, you're familiar with this name. If you do not, or if you're a new listener, let me introduce you to Crew Jackson. Crew Jackson is a specimen. 6'3" to 6'4", a little bit on the lighter side, super fast, beyond athletic. This is someone that at this time last year and during training camp, I was constantly seeing flashes of jersey number 43 flying around the field. And it's like, who is this guy? And you look and you're like, Crew Jackson, redshirt sophomore. Who are you? And he transfers in from Kansas State. And unfortunately, he's not able to get on the field last year. I don't know if it was injuries or maybe something else was going on, but we didn't get to see Crew Jackson last year, which is a shame, because he was someone that every practice I went to, I was seeing 43 flashing across the field. He was one of the guys I was most excited about. Well, once again, he's someone I'm going to be paying attention to, because if he is able to continue to play at a high level, you would think that in a transition year for the linebacker spot that he could find his way onto the field and flash that upside. He's on my radar. The last intriguing guy for me is Kavion Thunderbird, the redshirt freshman. He did not get too much time last year. I think he appeared in a couple of games for the Sun Devils. Nothing substantial. But similar to Crew Jackson, there's a lot of open opportunities here at the linebacker position. And Thunderbird, if he is able to build off of his redshirt year, could end up finding himself onto the football field quite a bit this year. It's wide open for any of these guys to take. And a young dude like Thunderbird, who is in the debut recruiting class of Kenny Dillingham and Brian Ward, the defensive coordinator, they like this kid. And there's nothing that they would like more than to see him get onto the field sooner rather than later. So here's your opportunity for him to come out and be a stud. He could be a breakout guy this year. Now, the only starter that I have listed here is Tate Romney. And I do feel good about him being a starter. He's the only guy that I would feel really confident in being a starter for the team. He was top 5 in tackles last year. He had a sack. He had a fumble recovery. He was a good player. You're ready to see if he's able to take that next step forward and become a great player. I want to see if he can turn into the next Merlin Robertson or Kyle Soley that the Sun Devils have had in recent years that have been pillars of strength for the middle of the defense. There's that potential for him, and he's still a very young guy as a redshirt sophomore. So they got him on the field last year. They really liked him. I just feel like he probably, it's his job to lose, I would imagine. I'm still really interested in Caleb McCullough, too. He's a redshirt senior. This could be his year to finally break into the starting lineup for the team. I wouldn't be surprised. It's just a really, really intriguing and weird year for the linebacker spot. And again, it's weird in a very good way because there's a ton of depth, but you don't really know who's starting. I feel confident saying that it's going to be it's going to be Tate Romney at one of those spots, but it could very well be Fiaseu and Keyshawn Elliott, or it could be Kavian Thunderbird and Kerr Jackson, or it could be Tate Romney and Jordan Crook, or it could be any other combination. There's a lot of ways that the linebacker spot could end up going for the Sun Devils this year. It's a very good problem to have. Even better problem is the depth that they have in the secondary, both at corner and the safety spot. And we'll talk about that in a moment. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. One more time, wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like, hit subscribe, turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. I appreciate you guys for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. A shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. And if you have not hit the subscribe button on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that button. We're trying to get to 1,000 followers before the season starts. We got a long ways to go, but I believe 100% that we can get to that point, and we'll find a way to celebrate together. The secondary. There is some big intrigue back here. So you're going through a lot of changes. Shocker. That's been the whole defense. You are replacing 4 of 5 starters from last year. You are replacing all 3 starting corners and one of your starting safeties. The returner from last year's starting 5 is Shamari Simmons. We'll talk about him later. You are replacing your top 3 corners in Ro Torrence, Jordan Clark, and D Ford. You're replacing depth as well. Ed Woods ended up entering the transfer portal. He was slotted to be your number one corner. You end up attacking the transfer portal, and you brought in 2 really, really key outside guys at the corner spot. And then you brought in what could be a potential superstar in the slot. Let's start with the intriguing guys here. First one is Javen Robinson. And Robinson is somebody who is coming from the Brian Ward recruiting back at Washington State. He is going to be a redshirt sophomore, so he's still very young. He's inexperienced. He's got a little bit of time, but nothing too crazy. But he's got a starting spot laying on his lap. It's all about if he's able to seize that opportunity and make the most of it. And it's not going to be easy because there's 2 really big time depth players that I think are really going to challenge for spots here between Keith Abney and Keontae Bradley. Those are 2 guys that are really going to push Javen Robinson for starting time. But I do think as of now, Robinson probably has an edge over those 2. He's got God-gifted abilities as a 6 foot, 170-pound corner with good speed and some ball skills. There is every opportunity for him to be corner one. I really like him. I really, really like him. I don't like him as much as the guy who I believe is corner one, who we'll talk about a little later. But if Javen Robinson ended up being your number 2 corner across from corner one, you're in a very good situation. Moving to the secondary, Kamari Wilson is somebody that could end up being one of your joker pieces to the defense. And you could plug him in the front 7. You could have him dropping back into coverage. He is a former super highly recruited guy, really, really high 4-star kid who originally committed to Florida. He comes to Arizona State as a redshirt sophomore. There's just a lot that he offers for this team. Athletically, in terms of upside, he could end up being, by the end of the year, similar to what I said with Elijah O'Neal. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year he was one of your starting safeties. And you have great depth at safety. We'll talk about them. Kamari Wilson was one of the most exciting transfers that the Sun Devils brought in this offseason. Between a guy we'll talk about here in just a minute and Tre Brown, I think that Kamari Wilson was probably the 3rd most exciting transfer to come in, and it was very exciting when the Sun Devils landed him. One more guy who's really intriguing. If you're a regular to the podcast, you know who this is. Montana Warren, safety. He missed just about all of last year after a leg injury he sustained at Camp T. He's 100% healthy, and there were times last year where I thought he was the best safety on the field. Now a redshirt freshman with a lot of time to get healthy, to learn the playbook, to become better at his position than he was a year ago. He could, similar to what I said about Wilson of being that joker player for you, he could be the exact same thing. And you just find a spot for him on the field. He's a beast. He's a stud. He was a 3-star out of Texas, which I've said before, you're a 3-star in Texas, you're a 4-star in 49 other states. He is special. And if he doesn't break out this year, then he will break out next year. This is another one of the highest upside players on the team. As far as important starters go, I got 4 guys here. I feel like these 4 should be the starters. The only spot that to me is open is probably corner 2 right now. I think you got your 2 starting safeties, your number 1 corner, and your slot corner. Number 1 corner, another transfer, LT Welch, coming from LSU, another 4-star recruit, another high 4-star recruit who's got some SEC experience. He's corner 1. And he's a beast. He's a monster. There's hope that he can be your true replacement for Ro Torrence, who was your number 1 corner each of the last 2 years. And there's obvious connections to make that are lazy. They're both transfer guys coming from the SEC who are big dudes. LT Welch, I believe, is 6'2", 6'1", 193, according to Ourlands.com. He's built exactly like what you look for in a starting corner. This is a very quality kid and instantly showed from day one of spring ball that he deserves to be your number 1 corner. The guy who will be sliding inside to replace Jordan Clark is Cole Martin. You couldn't ask for a better player to replace somebody who was a borderline all-time Sun Devil and someone who was one of the best players in the secondary the last 10, 15 years. Jordan Clark was a beast. It was devastating when you lost him, but bringing in Cole Martin, that's pretty good. Former 4-star out of Arizona. This is another Activate the Valley kid and somebody who in his lone year at Oregon was one of their better defensive players, and Oregon has a great defense. This is a highly regarded transfer for ASU. Outside of Tre Brown, you could argue that Cole Martin was the most exciting transfer addition for this team. Super high upside. and somebody that should be able to immediately pay his dividends for this defense. I think your two starting safeties are probably locked up too with Shamari Simmons and Xavier Alford. Simmons is the lone returner from last year. He ended up leading the team in tackles. He had a sack, he had a pick, he had 2 fumble recoveries. He did a little bit of everything for defense that didn't really rack up turnovers or numbers or anything like that. But there's also the stipulation that he was adjusting from FCS play when he was at Austin Peay. Now he is in his second year at Division I level. He was already good last year. I imagine he could be even better this year. And then Xavier Alford, friend of the podcast, Xavier Alford, is returning after having to sit out last year due to the NCAA's 2-time transfer policy. He looked like one of your plug-and-play starters last year. He's got ball hawking skills. He's one of the guys that, even though he didn't play last year, I feel very, very confident about sliding him in as one of my starters. And I'm very confident in him being a starter. It's not one of those like, oh, he's starting, but I don't know how I feel. No, he's starting, and you look at him and you're like, you're going to be one of the strengths of the team. This is a very good player. With those 4 and Javen Robinson or Keith Abney or Keontae Bradley being corner 2, this is a good-looking secondary, especially considering you lost 4 of your 5 starters from last year. Rolling this unit out, you feel confident that they can pick up where the unit that was playing before them had left last year. Maybe they can play even a little bit better. I think you have some really high upside kids with Welch, with Martin, with Alford, with Kamari Wilson. There's a ton of high upside players. There's a ton of high floor players. There's young guys. There's veteran guys. It's a nice melting pot of a little bit of everything. Secondary is very exciting. Now, as I look at the time, this is already a very long episode, so we are going to end up leading this into tomorrow, and we'll take a look at some bold predictions, including sacks, including turnovers. We'll talk about potential yards per carry allowed, yards per attempt allowed. We'll take a look at all sorts of different numbers that the defense could end up putting up together tomorrow. So make sure that you have your notifications turned on and you were subscribed to the podcast wherever you're getting your podcast so you get that update when the episode drops. I appreciate you guys for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. And a shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. Again, if you have not hit subscribe on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get to 1,000 before the season starts. We'll find a way to celebrate when we do hit that number. To stay in touch with everything, follow me on Twitter at RichieBrads36 and the podcast at LO_Sun Devils. We'll be back tomorrow to break down some bold predictions for the defense. I'll see you there. Till then, you keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun Devils.